So me, my boyfriend, his best friend, and his girlfriend drove up to Big Bear in June. Then a day later, a friend of ours drove up. He was supposed to sleep downstairs and the couple sleep upstairs, since there's only 2 bedrooms. The first night we stayed there, it was kind of creepy because the cabin was pretty remote, and of course there's absolutely no lights outside. It's in the woods with coyotes howling and bears, but nonetheless, completely normal for the most part. Around midnight, my boyfriend and I are in bed, when suddenly our friend sleeping downstairs comes banging on the door, freaking out, saying he saw shadows in the woods, and that the motion light came on, and there was thumping outside. We got a little freaked out, but my boyfriend gets out of bed and checks the entire cabin. He even goes outside and finds nothing. We go up to the other couple's room where there's a porch with sliding glass door that looks out into the woods. It's important to note that I am naturally very anxious and a scared person, while my boyfriend is a rock. He's calm and logical, while I tend to jump to the worst case scenario. My boyfriend goes over to check the last place in the cabin, so he pulls the curtain and jumps and yells, "Oh my God!" At this point, I'm terrified. My boyfriend is a 180-pound CrossFit coach, and to see a big guy like that scared is nauseating. He locked the door and backed away slowly. He quietly says, "There's a large man standing outside staring at us. He's just standing in the woods looking at us." At this point, I'm thinking he's fucking with me. He looks at me and says, "Go lock the door." That's when I knew he was serious. Everyone is freaking out. I run and lock the door behind us, and we all decide to stay in the room to keep an eye out. It's the middle of summer and it's really hot, but we refuse to open a window. I'm so scared, but trying not to show it, as everyone else seemed to have calmed down at this point. About 30 minutes go by and nothing happens. I get annoyed with the heat and the fact that there's 5 people in a tiny room and 3 of them are men, so my boyfriend and I go back to our room. I'm still pretty spooked, so my boyfriend tries to cheer me up. At this point, it's about 1:30 a.m. I told him I was too scared to sleep with the lights off. He tells me that's totally fine and he understands, so we just lay with the lights completely on. Finally, I start drifting to sleep when I hear a thud. I sit up and look at my boyfriend, and he looks back at me. Then, the power cuts off. I immediately start sobbing. I'm trembling and I can't say anything because it's pitch black. I try to get out of bed and run, but my legs get tangled in the sheets and I fall. My boyfriend picks me up. We grab our phones and run to the other room where everyone else was staying. I'm hysterical at this point. I try to contact our host, but nothing will go through. I try to call my dad, but all our phones say no service. We are completely alone out here. Thank God the friend that drove up after us had a different carrier. His phone had 1 bar, so he was able to call the sheriff. I realize now it's a bit of an overreaction, but at the time we thought we were going to die. He's on the phone with the sheriff and they transfer us to the utility company. We give the address and they tell us that we're too far in the woods and they don't cover that area. At this point, we were wondering if the entire area has no power or if the man outside had just cut off the power. I cry more and we call 911 to report suspicious activity and a power outage. They send the fire department. A few hours go by and it's 3 a.m. at this point, and suddenly the power comes back on. We fall asleep, and the next day we talked to some locals in the area. We told them our power went out and they said that that was strange and shouldn't have happened. He told us the only reason the power usually goes out up there is because of a snowstorm. He said he couldn't explain it. This past weekend, I was at a bachelorette party in Scottsdale, Arizona. We rented an Airbnb that is managed through a property management company. The front door had a key code that they changed for every new guest to check in. On the last night, we stayed up until about midnight before all going to our separate bedrooms. 2 of the girls locked up, front door, back door, and made sure the garage door was closed and that the garage entry door was locked as well. We are all into true crime, so we're definitely overly aware of our safety and surroundings at all times. Fast forward to about 3:30, 4 a.m.-ish, and one of my friends wakes up because she heard a door slam close and someone say, "Hello?" She is freaking out and can hear this person walk towards the room she's staying in with the other two of her friends. The intruder opened up the door and my friend shouted, "Who are you?" And the intruder, who looked like a girl our age, said sorry and ran out of the house through the garage door. She and the other two girls in the room got up and closed the door and checked everything else to make sure everything was still locked. On the other side of the house, one of my friends had woken up later in the night because she had a super unsettling feeling that someone was watching her while she slept. Her room had floor-to-ceiling windows with sliding doors going out to the pool. She had no idea that any of this other stuff happened until the next morning. It was really scary the next morning because everyone else had slept through all of this happening. If the intruder had bad intentions and my friend hadn't heard her enter, a very different scary scenario could have happened. We concluded that the property management group was not changing the entry door keypad codes or using the same code for both rental houses on the cul-de-sac, and the girl was drunk and got into the wrong house. My boyfriend and I were visiting a few friends in Richmond, Virginia. We went with another couple and decided to get an Airbnb. The other couple that we went with picked out the Airbnb, but they hadn't been to the area before, so the place they picked was about 15 to 20 minutes outside the city center. It was a bit of a pain in the ass, but not that big of a deal. The neighborhood was nice and the house was okay. When we got into the house, it seemed can't really describe it. It was nice enough. We were only staying there for the weekend, and the owner left us some banana bread. But there was just this odd vibe to it, and it was kind of a bit creepy. For example, when I put our stuff in the bedroom, I opened up the closet and there was nothing in it but a chair. Not like a fold-up chair, but a small child's chair, facing the bed from the closet. No hangers, no linens, no towels. Just a small chair in an empty closet. I know that reading it doesn't sound that creepy, but I promise you, it was weird. I brushed it off and we decided to settle in, and then go meet up with some friends in the city. Day turned into night, and we all had a bit to drink and decided to call it an evening at around 1:30. The four of us head back to the house and went to bed. Usually when I drink, there is nothing in the world that will wake me up. My head hits the pillow, and that's where I will remain until the sun comes up. So I don't know why it didn't happen this particular night. Maybe it was the feel of the house, but I woke up around 3 a.m. to a quiet giggle, like a grown man giggle. I thought maybe my boyfriend was just giggling in his sleep, but then the giggling started getting louder, and it sounded like it was coming from outside our window. The window was located behind the bed and above our heads, so I quietly snuck up to see if I could see anything. Nothing. There was no one out there, but it went quiet. The giggling had stopped, so I was about to go back to sleep, but then it started back up again. This time, I knew it wasn't my boyfriend, and I knew it wasn't the other couple. The giggling grew louder and louder until it was just a full-blown hysterical laughter, right outside our window at 3 a.m. I felt my boyfriend's hand clench mine. I didn't even know he was awake. I asked him, "Did you bring your gun?" "No, but I have my knife." He asked if I saw anything out there, and I said no. The laughing stopped after about 15 minutes. We stayed up till about 4 a.m., looking outside the window, making sure that the laughter didn't come back. We finally went back to sleep. When we woke up the next morning, we asked the couple if they had heard anything, and they said no. In fact, they thought we were crazy. One of them suggested that I dreamt it, but how did my boyfriend and I both dream that there was some random person laughing their heads off outside of our bedroom window? I can't tell what's creepier, to be honest. The fact that we heard that at 3 a.m. in this creepy house right next to our window, or that when I looked outside there was nothing there. I guess you can chalk it up to maybe not being able to see this person directly under our window But why would someone do that? Why would someone just stay for 15 minutes outside of a house giggling and laughing and then just presumably leave? Nothing happened after that. We went back home, but to this day, me and my boyfriend still bring this up as one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to us. In the summer of 2020, my friends Alex and Violet and I decided to go on a mountain vacation. COVID cabin fever had hit us hard, and we were desperate to get out. We settled on a mountain estate and planned to camp and hike at several different locations. For one night, we thought it would be fun to book a cabin in the woods. Violet's parents had rented a fire tower once and loved it, but a cabin beside a fire tower was all we could find. It was cheap, clean, and secluded. Excited to have a night where we could be as obnoxious and as weird as we wanted, so we booked it. In the weeks leading up to the trip, we decided it would be a great idea to drop acid at the cabin. Violet brought an entire sheet in preparation for our arrival, and it was tucked in her bag as we pulled out of the driveway to make our way to the cabin. I remember this knot in the pit of my stomach, this aching feeling that bothered me. I told Alex and Violet that there was no way we could drop acid that night. Violet was pissed. We turned around and got into a massive argument, but I stood my ground. I just knew that we had no business tripping that night. Finally, the fireworks settled and we were off. The cabin was roughly 30 minutes away from the nearest town. It sat atop a mountain. We held our breath as we rounded the busted road that spiraled towards the top. There were no pull-offs, no campsites, just a long winding road that led us to the cabin at the peak. We settled in and started a fire to keep us warm. As dusk gave way to night, we heard the unmistakable noise of an engine on the road, and then the flash of headlights. A side-by-side with 3 kids arrived and our nerves settled. They smiled, gave us a wave, climbed the fire tower and left. We'd heard that there may be occasional visitors to the fire tower, but they were the only ones who'd come by. We doused the fire and moved inside, heated some hot dogs until they were lukewarm, ate them fast and sat in silence. You don't know how quiet it is until you're in the middle of nowhere. You can hear every rustle of the leaves, the whisper of the wind through the branches. You get used to white noise living in the city. There's always the hum of an air conditioner or the dim roar of traffic to focus on. Here, the closest thing to white noise was the sound of our own breathing. We jumped at every noise, too frightened to speak to one another, and finally, I'd had enough. I cracked open a few wine coolers, passed them to Alex and Violet, and slapped a board game down on the table between the bunk beds. It didn't take us long to loosen up, and we were laughing, having a good time like we had envisioned. Much soberer than we thought, but enough that we were able to ignore the rumble of the woods. Later, we'd all recall hearing noises in the background, the snap of a twig, the dim rumble of an engine. None of us wanted to rupture the air of nonchalance between us, so we ignored it, until a human hand reached up to the window between us and slapped it 3 times. We were screaming in an instant. Alex called 911, put them on speaker, and handed the cell phone to me. He grabbed pokers from the fireplace and passed them out. Violet started calling family members and saying her last goodbyes. I held my breath and listened for any more noise. Whoever this was, or whatever this was, would have heard us call 911, and now they were being careful to make a silent retreat. Dispatch arrived 20 minutes later, which was a lucky thing for a 1 a.m. emergency phone call, and had their dogs check out the mountainside, but they found nothing. They suggested it may have been a deer, but I could tell from their faces that they didn't believe that for a second. We'd barely cooked those hot dogs, and why would a bear smack the window by a couple of screaming kids, rather than the one closest to the pan we'd used to cook? Why would a bear knock on the window like a human? Why, when we screamed, did the bear make a stealthy retreat? They had no answers, but they had an antidote. As they sped to us, They came across a car at the base of the mountain, but that was the only sign of life they'd seen. I remember my blood ran cold, but Violet and Alex were too frazzled to absorb the weight of what they had just said. And dizzied by the new horror, Violet's car, thoroughly dusted by our drive up to the mountain, was covered in handprints. Handprints that didn't match ours, that touched places we hadn't. We grabbed our ship by the armful and threw it inside, eager to remove every part of ourselves from this mountain. We followed the police, grateful for every pothole found us further and further from the wretched cabin. We made it down in record time and found lodging at a seedy hotel that reeked of cat piss. I couldn't sleep. The thought of that car on the road rang in my head. Remember, there was nothing else on that mountain. It was a narrow road to the top, no pull-offs, no campsites. There was the fire tower. Maybe a visitor decided to spook us during their late-night excursion. But the kids from earlier, we'd seen their headlights. Whoever did this had stopped their vehicle further down the road and hiked the rest of the way. They didn't want to be spotted. They wanted silence and secrecy. Whoever this was had been looking for a cheap scare. They planned this. I don't think I'll ever know what the person on the mountain wanted from us. I don't know if it was a practical joke or the beginning of a night of terror. I'm grateful for Alex's quick wit in calling 911. I wonder if our visitor knew we had service. It had certainly been a welcome surprise to us. Perhaps that was the wrench in his plan, enough to spook him before he could make things ugly.